This video is sponsored by Huel. If you want a full meal you can drink when you're slammed, scan this, or use the code LAW15 for 15% off at checkout, or go to us.huel.com/law15. The rain didn't fall, but I'm quite sure other things fell, including the hopes of one Oscar Piastri. My reaction during the sprint pretty much summing up everything. Oh no! What happened? Oscar's in the wall! Oh. Yeah, my boy had a really bad weekend again, but another boy had a brilliant weekend. I know Lando Norris won the race, but Kimi Antonelli turned an exposed strategy call and a controversial restart into yet another reason why Toto Wolff is probably grinning like a Cheshire cat. He was starting on the softs and surrounded by title contenders. Naturally, there'd be question marks as to how effective he could be off the start, but he held his nerve and he did so again for the rolling start. Although you could argue he maybe held his nerve a little too hard, pinching Piastri, then tagging Charles for the second time this year, leading to his retirement. It probably might explain why Leclerc, as well as some other drivers, weren't really unanimous in pointing the finger squarely at Oscar Piastri for the incident. He did manage to survive, and the stewards deemed no penalty necessary. But we'll save more of that debate for the Piastri section of this video and the losers one, so do keep watching. In either case, Kimi managed to survive any potential damage and continued on with his run plan after it being affected somewhat by the safety car. He managed to hold his own, and much faith was restored when it came time for him to be battling for position with Max Verstappen yet again. Seriously, this is just turning into what happened around the Canadian Grand Prix, only even more impressive. He managed to hold his own against a rampaging Verstappen on much fresher tyres, softer tyres may I add, and he didn't crumble. He managed to hold it all the way to the end, even to the point where Verstappen was flirting around with the idea of DRS. As a result, he came away with 2 second places and 25 points to his name, breaking through the 100-point barrier with style. And he scored the most amount of points in a rookie season. I just know it's about to awaken the banshee surrounding Lewis Hamilton's 2007 campaign. There they are. Get back! Get back! Get back! We know about points inflation! Yeah! Okay, let's get them to go away and talk about Lando Norris! Because he too won out, and mirrored somewhat the twist in the title fight that Max did last year, albeit to a lesser degree. But he's not going to care, because he delivered the kind of weekend that may soon convince McLaren to maybe pick a side if Verstappen comes on song again. Seriously, Las Vegas is going to be really important for Oscar Piastri to kick on. For now, Lando can really be proud with himself for basically dominating every single session, and really taking away Oscar's fire at the end of free practice 1, beating him by just a couple of hundredths, but he had the upper hand in that regard, and fair play to him, credit where credit is due here. His comments after focused on work still to be done and ignoring the noise, him turning ignoring the crap, which is quite a blunt way to state that, but it is valid. What's also valid is that he's a driver leading the title and matches his teammate in victories won in this season. That context makes it even stronger. Not only that, but it managed to eschew all of the bad memories of last year as Verstappen was hunting him down in the wet. That's surely rubbing salt into the wound for Lando at the time. He is just happy that he is now 24 points ahead of Piastri right now, with 3 rounds and a sprint to go. And he did that with maximum points. And then, of course, there was Max Verstappen, and I must say, that was some rather good damage limitation right there. Right up there with what he was able to do last year. There's just something about this track, even with a car that potentially can be blown way off course in terms of setup, he comes back from the pit lane and finishes 3rd on the podium, nearly getting 2nd place. That is crazy, and that is a sign that he is one of the greatest of the sport. Wow. That just really made this weekend even better. And the team thankfully managed to at least restore some of their reputation lost after Saturday, which saw Max crash out of Q1 for the first time in his whole career, based on pure pace and no accidental mistakes or bad timing. Managed to do it by making moves stick and actually doing some overtaking. Even with that stop that was actually after a puncture, a slow one. That should have buried him in the midfield, but it didn't. I must admit, though, that the choice to go on to softs was a bit of a desperate call, but as Max said so himself on the radio, they didn't really have much to lose. Well, they didn't have anything to lose. It was worth a try. You know, the old spirit of Christian Horner of giving it a go very much rings true around that organisation still. I personally think that if he just remained on those C3s and managed them, it might have been a little bit harder for Lando to try and pass him, and we might have had an exciting battle in of itself, but hey, they had to make do with what they had to make do. and we still got some exciting overtakes from him. And it probably bruised George Russell's ego with him pretty much, I think, out of the championship contention, so you're just getting him in the background going, oh no! But what mattered to Mekis and his crew is that they managed to rebound and change Max's tune. Him basically saying that people could forget about him hunting for the title, to him actually having a lot of fun the following day. That's a resounding letting out of breath right there. And amidst all of that, as well as Yuki Tsunoda completely collapsing amidst not only a mistake regarding Stroll, and then him getting a 10-second penalty not on his own fault, it was a sign that this is very much a one-man rescue bid, now boldened up even more with Red Bull being restored to third place in the Constructors. So, them actually being able to match what they did last year, after what they had at the start of the year, that's a decent turnaround for them. With the title fight still ready to surprise us, I've been relying on Huel's ready-to-drink offerings for a couple of weeks now, all stocked up in my fridge, ready to carry me through the ladder magic as my handy-dandy breakfast solution. With Huel, I get a full meal in one place, which keeps me from picking odd snacks throughout the day. And out of their many flavour offerings, chocolate is my pick. It's creamy and smooth, not chalky. I personally like this stuff chilled. It really hits the spot in my opinion, especially after hours and hours of yapping to you all. Bottles like this start from $4.83 and a case is 12 of these bad boys. That beats most grab-and-go options as much as Lando Norris around the Mexico City Grand Prix last time out. And when I've been trying to avoid cravings or grazing throughout the day, this and this have been game changers. Use code LAW15 for 15% off at checkout, or go to us.huel.com/law15, or you can just head on over there right away using the QR code right there. Stock your fridge once with some of this, and you're set for the week. Thanks once again hugely to Huel for sponsoring today's video, and let's continue on with the winners and losers. And then there was Racing Bulls. My goodness, that run to the line between Isaac and Liam within 0.2 of one another, Liam winning out, that was a major tell. Liam has to beat Hadjar, and he managed to do it on tyres that had been 52 laps old. Interlagos was a sharp reminder of how effective this team can be when everything goes to plan, especially strategy, where they have in the past fell short. Starting both Lawson and Hadjar on the softs gave them the launch that they needed, and for stuff later on to play out with far less pressure. And Liam's commitment to that one stopper, 52 laps, that was absolutely bonkers, and that really should have gotten Dr. Marco's nod of approval. It means that Racing Bulls, once again, are P6 in the Constructors. Hadjar's route, though, to 8th place was a little bit more messy. There was a last-minute push, there was him being stuck in traffic. It was not nearly as clear-cut as it was with Liam, where the Kiwi had a lot more clear air to play with. But, don't get me wrong, the underlying pace of Isaac was genuine, and it meant that they were able to secure a double points finish, which for the midfield was very, very important. And also what's really important is that I think Andy Permain and his crew trust both Isaac and Liam to race one another without actually having to make the call over the radio, at least I never heard it, to hold position, which does show an element of maturity from both drivers. This was a really good weekend for this team and for those drivers. But then we got to move to Oliver Behrman. The rhetoric has really changed in the last two races, hasn't it? Gone from the days of Oliver just ranting to anyone who would listen in Austin after what he had with Yuki. He's now come away with back-to-back points finishes, and he's brought Haas into play, then now really in the hunt for 7th place in the Constructors. And I can easily imagine that this is really quite a surprise for many people, because even after the heights of 4th place around Mexico, many people would have cited it as akin to what Daniel Ricciardo did a couple of years ago, as somewhat of a fluke, that, oh, this was some sort of an anomaly that is really not representative of Behrman's skills. But now we are here 2 weeks after Mexico, and he is once again in the top 6. Haas, the customer team of Ferrari, is likely to be now competing with Racing Bulls and usurping Aston Martin. Let's not forget here, Haas is the smallest team on the grid, Aston Martin wanting to be one of the biggest. This would be a David versus Goliath moment, and with Behrman's own performance and uptick in his full first rookie year, it's enough to maybe make some elements of Team LH start to sweat a little bit, because you got to remember, Oliver is a Ferrari Academy golden boy, much like how Charles Leclerc was a Ferrari Academy golden boy. And he's also ruffling the feathers of Esteban Ocon, who expected to be the team leader of that team by default, but no, it's probably an even more precarious situation than it was back over at Alpine with Pierre next to him. And what really helped was Behrman's attitude. He was also aware that both Ferraris retiring, as well as Max being out of position, and Piastri's penalty, did help lift him up to 6th place, and Komatsu's comments matched that, but both men praised to the hilt the strategy department for coming in clutch, Brazil being a place where serious talents can really announce their range if everything goes according to plan, especially for the fact that Komatsu's words of just trying to get the execution right and then dialing the Austin upgrades would provide some points. Well, wouldn't you know it, they provided over 70 of them. And speaking of Hulkenberg, this was a grown-up drive in a chaotic race and finally a Q3 appearance after a long time without. Yeah, Nico's first lap left him with work to do. He was boxed behind Albon, he lost ground where traffic could absolutely muller his race, but Sauber's pit wall came up with the goods and he too did a one-stop like Liam Lawson, albeit less impressive than the Kiwi's effort. He managed to make the soft tyres this time around last around 38 laps, which is no mean feat in and of itself and is a really good indicator that if Sauber get their facts right, that car has the potential to manage its tyres well, the C4s. And it made it even easier for the fact that for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Nico's grid position was actually somewhat manageable in the top half, thank you very much, instead of having him do all the work from near the back. And it came away with a couple of points, 2 of them. And yes, that is small potatoes when comparing to the fact that Racing Bulls managed to accrue 10, and even Aston Martin managed to get a cheeky 3. Haas gets an 8 for their 6th place with Behrman, but they do have potatoes to have. And I don't know whether you've seen it or not, but there have been footage of when Ocon's doing an interview, Nico's right there, he sees Gabi, gives him a pat on the shoulder and acts like a real good father figure. I'm pretty sure that many people around Brazil are looking to what Nico and Gabi can do, and if Audi turn out to be good next year, this could be a really potent lineup. And then Alpine, I mean, come on, they managed to get a point on the Saturday, but then after Saturday afternoon, this was getting out of hand. Now there were 2 of them. 2 points for Alpine in this economy. For Alpine, it must feel like 22. 1 in the sprint and 1 in the main race, and they land heavy. Across the weekend, he was consistently shocked at that the car was coming alive at a track which I really did expect Franco to struggle to best the Frenchman, but not to this magnitude. The latter, Pierre, having 2 podiums to his name here. He's got a knack for the place, simple as that. He started on the softs, forced an early stop, and then that dropped him into the uglier parts of the pack, but his race was defined by how he managed those resets and the tyres. I mean, yes, this was a fantastic achievement and a boost in morale for the team, and then being able to score a point and then another point on the Saturday, but his tanglings with Hadjar and him not being able to win out to get any higher than 10th was a sign that the car had very much met its limit, basically. Pierre's words were a mixture of satisfaction and frustration that maybe more points might have been afforded to him had he been able to qualify that little bit higher within Q3. But quite frankly, an Alpine in Q3, that's a miracle in of itself. They should really just be glad and take that. And especially after several races where the Argentinian has made real inroads in Gasly's reputation and stock within Formula 1, him being able to score a point with that car, whereas his teammate was only able to manage 15th after his own maladies, which I will get to later, this was a very much needed shot in the arm in restoring some justification of why Alpine chose to commit to him. Now we just got to wait and see what happens with a brand new engine next year. And now we get to the meh section. It's a little short this time around, and I start this off with George Russell, and you might be thinking, Law? Putting George Russell in the mess section, that's a little harsh. He got a 4th place in the race and a 3rd place in the sprint. That's pretty good in itself. Yes, 18 points for the weekend is pretty good, and it helped Mercedes get to 2nd place in the Constructors handily. But here's the problem. Yet again, Antonelli was able to extract more from the same package across the weekend and excite many more people. Mexico looked a little weird, but Brazil was enough to make people turn to Kimi and go, hey, you're pretty good. It's all about the optics. Yes, of course, you and I are very much aware that George was having to struggle with a car that wasn't braking to the way that he would have liked. But to the masses out there, to the people who are casual fans, they'll see the results and thinking, wow, Kimi's actually starting to get better than George. What's next year going to look like if Mercedes are the best? Is this going to be 2014 part Dirks? Russell admitted he had been fighting the car and lacked the pace to challenge properly, and Mercedes' tone toward him was positive, highlighting his role in Mercedes now being a more convincing runner-up this year. The drive felt more like a correction and management, whilst the Italian Verstappen, he shone amidst chaos and immense pressure from the elites, and he still landed P2. Therefore, what Russell was able to do, the P4, at this point in the season, is now the yardstick. It's the baseline. It's the bare minimum. This is a sign that Russell really needs to step up, or else he could really be left with egg on his face next year regarding his contract. But either way, I don't think it's going to do much good for Russell's case in being the de facto team leader without question, because Toto's right there, Kimi's in the car, he's saying, well, George, you've got to look at what Kimi's able to do in the car, and then what you were able to do in the car. I know you had your problems with your brakes, George, but Kimi, wow, I've got goosebumps all over. And then there was Williams. This might seem weird considering many other midfield teams scored points, whereas Williams scored none, but hear me out. They did flirt with a feel-good result, but they let it drift away. Both cars survived the Turn 1 skirmishes, yes, after a rather nothingy sprint, and the split strategies initially gave them hope. Albon's pace on the Sunday was looking good after a rather ponderous Saturday, but you really got to look at the situation here is that this was yet another example of Williams dropping the ball on execution, whereas teams like Sauber and Haas were able to show that they can get execution down pat, whereas Williams are left flailing, Valves once again having to take it on the chin, realising there's stuff to do. But you'd be thinking, well, you've been like this the entire season, guys, yet you really haven't learnt a thing, have you? This is stuff that's very much left points on the table. Because keeping Albon out too long cost track position. The strategy just didn't work. And then Sainz's contact at the start with Hamilton and the resulting damage, tied up with a horrid bow of a slower stop, meant he was limited in potential himself. It wasn't a complete disaster like it was over at Aston or Ferrari or anything like that, but this campaign from Williams was very much a resounding And now we get to the losers, and Oscar. I look at him and sigh despondently. After all the hopes of newly found stylistic choices with his driving after Mexico qualifying, Piastri's race weekend was the kind of outing that shapes a title story, and not in the way that he would want. Lando scores 33 points over the weekend, maximum points may I add, and Oscar scores a total of 10. I know that many people out there are getting your spanners of speculation, your foams of doubt, your cinnamon of cynicism, and maybe other conspiratorial similes or representations or what have you. That sabotage is at play here, but the fact of the matter is, though, is that Oscar, right here, is showing a sign where the pressure, I think, is really starting to get to him. I feel for my boy. I have to remind myself that this is only his third season, and Norris has got the experience, and the experience is the thing that is keeping him winning this championship. Crashing out in the sprint was a sign of things to come, and holding fourth off the line was okay, but the restart move on Antonelli defined his afternoon, and maybe make me note about previous instances where Oscar's done a damn dare move, and it doesn't play out as intended. The intent was understandable because he's in a championship fight with Norris. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and let things happen. But the execution was off. Nor did the Australian anticipate the Italian cutting a sharper line into turn 1 than he probably expected. There was the late lunge, he gets on the curves, he locks up, he then makes contact with Kimi, who then makes contact with Charles. It made me think that the stewards are going to be having a look at this, they're not going to let him get away with this at all. And sure enough, that was the case, because a car DNF'd and Antonelli had to take to the runoff to be able to get back on the track. This is all down to the fact, if you look at the document right here, it all boils down to, oh, when you see, Oscar didn't own the corner, because it's all to do with corners and apexes and front axles. That was what the stewards were going with. In Piastri's defence, the drivers, including the very man who got ousted, reckoned he wasn't entirely to blame, that he couldn't just simply disappear. But the penalty still stood, and Oscar's now only 4 penalty points away from a race ban. Yes, when you look at it from a results perspective from last year, 3 fifth places in comparison to what he was able to do in 2024 is an improvement, but it's nowhere near good enough, with Lando basically installing himself as the brand new host of the Max Verstappen podcast nearly every single weekend. And then Verstappen himself is honing in on him in second place in the championship. So therefore, I'm not sugarcoating this. This was a horrible weekend for my boy. And this is very important for all of you out there to learn, that you can give credit where credit is due, but you must give criticism where criticism is due, even if it's your boy or your gal. But it wasn't as bad as Ferrari's weekend. That was grim. Made worse by the fact that Sunday's raw pace with Leclerc especially was cut short by them resulting in a double retirement, and the team slipping to fourth in the constructors because of it. And it really just put paid to what Leclerc was able to do in qualifying with a fairly solid grid position. A podium might have been on the cards. He was looking really spicy on the outside, maybe trying to take third place on the road to maybe then hunt down Piastri, or maybe see what happens with the 2 McLarens above. Like maybe if they get into some argy-bargy, Leclerc might have had an opportunity for something more. But we will never know. And then Hamilton's weekend was even worse, at a track that he loves. Tagged at turn 1 by Sainz, then tagging the back of Colapinto, with Lewis getting a 5-second penalty afterwards, his Ferrari was compromised with the floor being completely ravaged, and after repeated calls to park the car for his own and the car's safety, his wish was granted, and he then retired. I know that Fred's trying to calm things down and look at the good side of things and say, oh, well, if you look on Friday, there were things to be proud of about the progression toward the end of the season. But no. The Tifosi don't care. Both cars failed to finish. Lewis was out in Q2. They will want someone's head. I'm pretty sure of it. And Lewis really cut a despondent figure because he is an honorary citizen of Brazil. This is an honorary home race right here, and he was nowhere. And then his old team, which historically in the last couple of years had not been doing exactly that great, has a fantastic race, then finishing 2nd and 4th. But the fact is, though, is that for Hamilton and Leclerc, this was not the weekend that Ferrari wanted, and now they're 4th place. They're 4th place, with Red Bull taking the mantle with one car, effectively. And then there's Aston Martin. Yeah, they did score 3 points in the sprint, but the race undermined that punchy performance from Fernando because of no pace and a poor read on strategy. That can be boiled down to the fact that they started the race on the C2s, the hard tyres. After the last couple of days, the water washed away all of the rubber that had been laid down, meaning there was not that much inherent grip, and therefore the tyres just weren't able to activate because the temperatures were really cool in relation to other times we've seen during the weekend. This was a really poor decision, and then made worse by the fact there was an early safety car, so they couldn't come in and just change the tyres, or they just chose not to. Then Stroll's race unravelled further with contact with not only Bortoleto, but then with Tsunoda that sent him spinning right to the back. Alonso, after looking sharp in the sprint, spent the Grand Prix not able to do anything. He was stranded, with Crack's explanation acknowledging that they tried to be different but didn't have the car to back it up. So therefore I think the strategists will be really limited in what they can actually do. They have to look at the car and thinking, can we really pull off that kind of bold maneuver? They've really got to play it safe and just hope for the best of people crashing out in front, maybe a cheeky safety car near their pit stop window. They really can't do much in terms of strategy. They can't be frisky. And yes, them scoring 1 point more than Sauber is something, but Haas scored more than them. Racing Bulls scored more of them. There is a very real danger of Papa Stroll's team finishing this year 9th in the Constructors. That, sure, gets you more wind tunnel and ATR time for next year. That'll be music to Adrian Newey's ears. But in terms of ego and prize money, oh, that's gonna rub the Canadian billionaire up the wrong way. And another person being rubbed up the wrong way, and having started on the hard tyre, was Esteban Ocon. He sits in this annoying category where a driver, he can point to bad luck quite justifiably, yet the result still counts against him, in the fact that Oliver Behrman was able to do what he did. It was very much back on form, with Esteban being the reference driver, the butt monkey, in terms of just going on the hard tyres and seeing what they do, hoping for a safety car to lift him up the order. I'm pretty sure that Ocon's just getting sick and tired of this. Behrman's getting all of these points. He's now 10 points ahead of the Frenchman, and this was not what Esteban signed up for. I know that Ayo Komatsu is his mate, but even mates' rates have their limits at this point. And then to top it all off, he got a puncture. Then the virtual safety car happened. That was it. He got close to maybe scoring points. He got up to 12th, but the chances of a double points finish, that just wasn't enough. Just mere tenths away from Gasly in P10. It was close, but no cigar. For a driver of Ocon's experience, that really must hurt. He's experiencing what Alonso must have felt at McLaren when Hamilton rocked up, the expected narrative being completely flipped. And yes, the team did accept the blame regarding not properly managing the puncture, but that really doesn't matter much given the already negative or cool attitude toward Ocon many F1 communities still have toward him. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that many people who don't like Esteban are loving this right now and are going to point to the fact that the rookie is doing better than him. I feel like this is a really unfortunate circumstance for Esteban. I thought this was going to be a breath of fresh air, but arguably, this is an even more muddled affair than it was over at Alpine. At least there was somewhat of a semblance of them being equal. I don't really know much anymore. So yeah, if you're an Ocon fan, I can imagine you're feeling pretty aggrieved, but I'm quite sure you're not like Yuki Tsunoda fans right now, who may be at this point dry heaving. This was... Oh god! This was the ugly side of the case to try and keep him around next year at Red Bull. After folks joking about him being left off to fend for himself at the airport, to his admittance that his duties of development weren't as big as Max's, and then a day where Verstappen showed what the car could do in race trim, Tsunoda, I'm sorry, he looked pathetic. I hate to say it, but you can't sugarcoat it, much like how I can't sugarcoat what happened with Piastri. It was a bad weekend for my boy. It was a bad weekend for Yuki, topped off with the fact that Red Bull touched the car too early and he got another 10-second penalty to his name. But remember where the first one came from, and there was no lap one, oh, it's a racing incident there to protect him. Although you could argue maybe, well, if he got a penalty, then why didn't Lance get a penalty for taking off Gabi? What was going on here? Maybe the penalty was him being crashed out, who knows? But yeah, I feel like there should be some element of justice for Gabi, but we're talking about Yuki here. I can understand why some Yuki fans are crying foul here, because you then had the 12-second pit stop in Mexico. It seemed a bit fishy. And Tsunoda's own comments, yeah, they hit the right notes in that he didn't give up regardless. He didn't just sit back and die, but they do sit awkwardly beside his overall result. And Meki's assessment was kind given the situation, but even he couldn't shake off the initial penalty being a major issue. And what makes it worse is that he was the only Red Bull back driver to not score a thing. The lowest other Red Bull driver was 8th place, it being Isaac Hadjar. That's a lot of points that crew managed to amass, and Yuki did not play a part at all. Yeah, this was an absolute clanger, I'm afraid. And then with Gabriele Bortoleto, he apparently spent some time hanging out with Rubens Barrichello the other day. And maybe the curse of Barrichello transferred over to him, like our higher power doesn't want a Brazilian to do well here. Because not only does he crash out in spectacular fashion in the sprint, which we then see him hours later in his helmet ready to get back in for Q1, even though the car didn't make it out in time because it was too badly damaged, that showed some guts and some balls. He then goes and gets taken out by Stroll on lap 1. He's not able to try and do a thing to make up ground. But at least the mood toward him wasn't mocking or critical, it was just lucky for the fact that he was okay after that first crash, and then commiseration after what happened during that first start. Instead, he became a spectator. Mentally, that is a downer of the highest order, but the overall sentiment, it's been kind. A mixture of relief and the team just thinking, after all of that work, it then gets completely wiped out. It's nice to see a change of mood toward Bortoleto after, at the beginning of the year, people didn't really give two hoots about him. They're just thinking, well, who's this guy? Now, people actually give a damn about Gabi. I do feel like this is something that he can learn from. And with Hülkenberg, again, with him taking him under his wing, I feel like next year will be a completely different situation. But hey, at least his first weekend was memorable. And this kid's got some guts. I'm really, really stoked for this kid. And then we finish off with Franco Colapinto. And I'm really pleased that he got a seat for next year. That's a win in of itself. Many people actually starting to warm themselves towards the Argentinian again. But then his performance this weekend, it may not have been absolutely catastrophic, but it certainly paled in comparison to Gasly. I was seeing this coming. I knew Pierre was going to be good around here. But Franco, he didn't really have much of a leg to stand on, quite frankly, through many other circumstances that were sort of beyond his control, or losing control at turn 3. I knew someone would go off at turn 3, but I really didn't want it to be two of my boys. Yes, I do proclaim Franco as one of my boys. He didn't really recover properly after coming off at turn 3, a place which, to be fair, has taken out some of the best of races in recent memory, such as Michael Schumacher. It happens. Then Hamilton tagging his rear end on lap 1 didn't help either, most likely. From there, he spent the race in traffic and never really was able to unlock the rhythm he was able to demonstrate in previous races. His explanation being that the rebuilt car really didn't feel as planted as he wanted it to be. It was a tall order for him to get out of Q1 in that regard. Alpine being able to rebuild that car in time for qualifying is a major achievement. That has to be given credit there. And it does mean that maybe the car doesn't feel quite the same because you've got to do a bodge job and that chassis has probably taken a bit of a bruising. But the bruising here is that Colapinto was able to finish 15th, but the reality here is that Colapinto was quite a ways behind Gasly here, unlike in previous races, where it's basically been the two of them fighting each other within a couple of seconds. It was not close here. Yes, of course, him being at the wrong place regarding his contact with Hamilton, that was unfortunate, and him going off at turn 3, that was also unfortunate because, well, it happens because the track was drying, you're not quite sure whether or not you actually have the grip, and then you don't have the grip, and then you're done. But unfortunately, not being able to show any source of a forward signal, or even just getting up to 14th, is something that does count back against him. But don't get me wrong here, this was not a meltdown weekend, this was more like a slow bleed after the sprint crash. And I trust you'll sprint over to this video right here to get your next fix of the ladder man, which I believe you will enjoy. I'll see you over there.